Good evening, I'm Mr. Felton. On the news summary tonight, Tuesday, August 11th, 2020, 2020 Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has selected California Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate. Now, lots of history is being made today, folks. For one thing, Kamala Harris is now the third female vice presidential nominee in American electoral history. The first was Representative Geraldine Ferraro from New York back in 1984, selected by 1984 Democratic nominee Walter Mondale, former Vice President to 39th U.S. President Jimmy Carter during his single term in office from 1977 to 1981. The second female vice presidential nominee was Alaska Governor Sarah Palin, nominated by 2008 Republican presidential nominee Arizona Senator John McCain. And oddly enough, if not ironically enough, possibly coincidentally enough, Kamala Harris was born the same year as Sarah Palin, 1964. But there are many more amazing parallels to follow regarding this, with Kamala Harris being Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. She is the second California politician to be running for a top position in the White House since Ronald Reagan, our 40th U.S. president from 1981 to 1989, and former governor of California from 1967 to 1975. Now, speaking of Reagan, there's also a parallel being drawn between him and Joe Biden on the age front. You may remember from my last video posted a couple weeks ago regarding the 2020 presidential election scene, which of course has had an update effective today that I just mentioned and that we're hearing all about on the news. So, Ronald Reagan was older than several presidents before him, going back as far as 1960 and 35th U.S. President John F. Kennedy. So between 1960 and 1980, you get 20 years, and from Kennedy, LBJ, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, that's 5 U.S. presidents, with LBJ being the only one that Reagan wasn't older than. By 3 years, LBJ was born in 1908, Reagan was born in 1911. Now, Biden, should he win the 2020 United States general election in November of this year, on Tuesday, November 3rd, he will be the oldest president ever to enter office upon his first term at age 78. He would also be older than Ronald Reagan was when Reagan exited office in January of 1989 at the age of 77, although just a few weeks short of turning 78. So Biden is also older than several presidents before him, as I mentioned in my previous video. He's older than Donald Trump by 4 years. He's older than Barack Obama by 19 years. He's older than Bill Clinton and George W. Bush by 4 years each. So between 1992, when Bill Clinton came into office and was elected as the 42nd U.S. president, and 2020, that's a 28-year period. So former Vice President Joseph Biden, being older than presidents over a 28-year period, also takes the cake in terms of him beating Reagan on that front, chronologically speaking. Speaking of cake, Reagan had a real sweet tooth. He loved Jelly Bellies. That kind of says a lot about him, but I'll go into that at another time. All right, let's focus on other parallels here. So, we've got the age front. If you want to talk racial demographics, well, Kamala Harris, if she and Joe Biden were to win the 2020 election, she would be not only the first woman vice president, but she also, given Biden's age, if she were to have to step into his shoes, she would be not only the first woman president, but also the second African-American president, right behind Barack Obama. But Kamala Harris herself is also mixed. She has some Southern Asian in her heritage. Her mother was from India. She was Indian American, and her father was African American. Now, in case some of you younger viewers of this video don't know, Barack Obama himself is actually literally African American. His father was born in Kenya, his mother was born in Kansas. So, he too is biracial. Another demographic worth noting on the presidential platform. Now, how does Biden tie into these demographics? Well, if Biden wins the presidency, he will be only the second U.S. president who is Catholic. Our first U.S. president of Catholic origin was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, Kennedy actually received a lot of flack from many of his opponents for being Catholic. Up to that point in time, no Catholic person had ever become president. Now, of course, as stated in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the people, we the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, skipping ahead a little bit, to the fact that you are allowed freedom of religion. So if you're allowed freedom of religion, why would it matter whether you're this religion or that religion, or religious at all for that matter? Well, it mattered to a lot of opponents of John F. Kennedy in the 1960 election, and during his very short tenure as U.S. president from January 1961 to his ill fate on November 22, 1963, in the city of Dallas, Texas, at the hands of prime suspected gunman Lee Harvey Oswald, although there are several other prime suspects and corresponding controversies to the Kennedy assassination, which you can always do more research about. Anyway, so again, Biden would make history by being only the second Catholic president in U.S. history. But he was the first of two Catholic U.S. vice presidents. Current standing Vice President Mike Pence is also Catholic. 2012, Republican vice presidential nominee, then Representative Paul Ryan, turned Speaker of the House prior to his premature retirement at the age of 48 in 2018, Paul Ryan was also Catholic. So even if Mitt Romney had won the election in 2012 against Barack Obama for the presidency, there still would have been a Catholic vice president, just statistically speaking. Now, not only would Biden be the second Catholic president in U.S. history if he were to win the election this year, but there are some other very interesting parallels. Mike Pence, besides being Catholic himself, is the second vice president in American history to hail politically from Indiana. The first vice president in American history who was from Indiana was Indiana Senator Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle was vice president under 41st U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush, father of George W. Bush, for Bush's one and only term in office from 1989 to 1993. Now, let's look at Trump for a minute here. If Trump loses the election this year, he will be the first U.S. president since George H.W. Bush not to win a second term. Every president between H.W. Bush and Trump, and that includes Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, all three of those consecutive presidents served 2 terms in office. So you multiply 8 years by 3 presidents, you get 24 consecutive years of 2-termed presidents. So if Trump breaks the streak by losing to Biden, he will be the first president in 28 years to lose the White House after only 1 term. Prior to George H.W. Bush, the last president to achieve only 1 term in office was 39th U.S. President Jimmy Carter. But he certainly has had the last laugh in terms of defeating not only his predecessor, Gerald Ford, whom Carter also ran against in the 1976 presidential election and successfully defeated. But also Carter has outdone his successor, Ronald Reagan, in terms of outliving both of them. Carter is now 95 years old. If he can make it to October 1st, he'll turn 96. Ronald Reagan lived to be 93. He died in 2004. Gerald Ford also lived to be 93. He died in 2006. George H.W. Bush lived to be 94. He was born the same year as Jimmy Carter in 1924. He died in November 2018. So Carter has beaten him by 1, maybe 2 years. We'll see if Carter can hang on for just another 2 months. It's incredible, these presidential parallels, and they happen every election, believe it or not, even if some are a little more apparent than others. But let's turn our attention to George H.W. Bush, Donald Trump, and their respective vice presidents. If Trump loses this election and becomes the first president since George H.W. Bush to achieve only one term in the White House, then this will be the second time in history when a standing president with a vice president from the state of Indiana did not go on to win a second term. Now, between Mike Pence and Dan Quayle, the two of them are quite different. Mike Pence was 57, when he and Trump won the 2016 election. Dan Quayle was only 41. Now, Quayle got a lot of flack, not only for his young age for running for vice president, but also due to the fact that a lot of people on both sides of the fence, Democrat and Republican, felt that he was inexperienced as he'd only been in the Senate for a handful of years. Also, the age difference between George H.W. Bush and Dan Quayle was a huge 23 years, so it was like a father and son duo, even though there have been plenty of other huge gaps between the ages of standing presidents and vice presidents in history since then, and a little bit before then too. But even though no one blamed Quayle for Bush not achieving a second term, he definitely remains one of the most maligned vice presidents in American history. And he's still alive today, so good for him. Pence, well, obviously he's been outshone considerably by President Trump. But here's another interesting parallel between Trump, Bush, and Biden, and I should say among, not between. Get your grammar right there, Mr. Felton. So when Bush was elected president in 1988, even leading up to it in the debates ahead of time versus Democratic nominee, former Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, people thought that Bush, who was 64 years old at the time, might not live to see the end of his first term. So debate moderators were asking him, listen, buddy, if you don't live to see the end of your first term, do you really think that Dan Quayle can take over just like that? And Bush was quite offended because he was younger by a couple of years than Reagan was when Reagan ran for his first term in 1980 at the age of 69. But that did bring up an interesting point, and still today does, especially given Biden's more advanced age by 14 years compared to H.W. Bush's age in 1988. What would happen if Biden were to either die in office or choose not to run for a second term? Well, he's not the only president to do that. The last president who left office before his, in this case, second term was up was Richard Nixon when he resigned on August 9th, 1974. The last president to die in office was John F. Kennedy at the hands of a bullet on November 22nd, 1963. In each instance, their vice presidents, Lyndon Johnson for Kennedy, Gerald Ford for Nixon, had to jump right in. And that's the way it works with the Constitution. So if Biden wins the election but dies in office during his first term, then presumptive Vice President Kamala Harris would have to step into his shoes immediately, being the first time to do so in however many years it might be since 1974, between 45 and 50, we'll just say hypothetically, you know. But let's say that Biden does make it through his first term, again, if he wins in November, and chooses not to run for re-election. Well, he's not the first president to do that. Lyndon Baines Johnson, aka LBJ, who was Kennedy's vice president turned successor. In 1968, his popularity and polls had dropped so considerably due to him having sent American troops over to Vietnam to fight in the Vietnam War, beginning in 1965. As the years passed, so too did the soldiers. So by 1968, with nationwide riots, people were really hating on LBJ and saying, you know, get out. You're hurting this country. You're killing our innocent young men and even women overseas. Well, LBJ actually listened to the people and said, I will not seek nor shall I accept re-election as President of the United States. And this was in March 1968. So he made it to the end of his first full term. He stepped in 1 year before the election of 1964, won the election of 1964 against Barry Goldwater in a landslide. But due to his waning popularity and the escalating Vietnam War, LBJ was in over his head, so he did not take part in the 1968 race for president. Instead, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, did upon winning the Democratic nomination following the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy on June 5th, 1968 in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California by Sirhan Sirhan, who is still alive today. And he's told his tale about it on YouTube videos. So, yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. If Biden, for whatever reason, does not live to see the end of his first term, or chooses not to run for a second term due to his advanced age, he'd be 82 by the end of his first term in 2024, then Kamala Harris would either, by default, become the first woman president of the United States should Biden leave or die in office before 2024, or she could run for president in 2024 if Biden wins and chooses not to run for re-election then, and she would still become the first woman president in that way. So it's incredible all the different parallels that there are between all these different presidential elections, but that's what makes American electoral and presidential history incredible. And with every passing year, new history is made. On the religion front, I should point out that not only would Biden be the first Catholic president to, the second Catholic president in history, but we have not had presidents of some religions. We've never had a Jewish president. We've never had a Greek, Russian, or otherwise Orthodox president. We've never had an atheist president. We've never had an agnostic president. The religions to really dominate the scene in presidential history have been Christianity, Methodist, Episcopalian, Protestant, but we have had some presidents who are no denomination either, namely Abraham Lincoln. So some more demographics there. All right, well, that concludes today's lengthy lesson about Joe Biden and what he represents demographically and statistically going forward. Will he win in November? Will he lose in November? Will Trump become the fourth consecutive U.S. president to achieve a second term? Or will he become the first in 28 years not to achieve a second term? Will he try and cancel the election? What's interesting about that is that according to the Constitution, if he tries to cancel the election, then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi would become president come January 2021. So she'd be the first woman president. Looks like either way, women are getting closer and closer to becoming the first president. It's exciting, it's suspenseful, it's history. All right. Take good care. Remember to vote in November, if not before. Turn those ballots in. Don't let the U.S. Postal Service and Trump get in your way given what's going on in that regard. Make sure you're registered to vote, fill out your ballots, sign, seal, and deliver them accordingly. We'll see you online and again here another evening. I'm Peter Felton. Thank you and good night.